In 1944, near the shattered hedgerows of Normandy, a German lieutenant general made a decision in seconds, one that would determine whether he lived long enough to see another sunrise. He had no idea that this single moment, born in fire and chaos, would return to him decades later in the quiet hum of an American hospital waiting room. And change everything he thought he understood about enemies, mercy, and the strange ways history circles back. Normandy in early June 1944 was a landscape torn apart. The orchards shook under the endless roar of artillery. Black smoke crawled across the sky like a living creature searching for someplace to settle. The German 7th Army was collapsing under the weight of an invasion unlike anything the world had seen, panzer divisions trapped in a maze of bombed-out roads, convoys igniting before they even reached the front, and desperate reports flooding headquarters faster than anyone could read them. Paratroopers behind the lines. Bridges gone. Villages changing hands before maps could be updated. War was no longer following rules, it was devouring them. In that chaos stood General Heinrich Reuss, commander of a sector that barely existed anymore. His units were scattered shadows, his officers dead or drifting between field stations, his communication lines shredded into silence. He had survived Moscow's winter, Tunisia's fever, Sicily's shrapnel. But Normandy was different. It wasn't a battle. It was a breaking. Born in Baden-Württemberg, the son of a schoolteacher and a railway engineer, Reuss had grown up in a world held together by discipline and quiet dignity. The collapse after World War I carved bitterness into his generation: empty plates, empty pockets, empty promises. The Reichswehr offered him structure when the world offered nothing else, and he climbed its ranks with steady, stubborn clarity. By 1944 he was respected for one thing: honesty. He never promised his soldiers victory, only that he would stand with them as the world fell apart. But exhaustion lived in his bones. He knew the war was lost. He stayed only to delay the collapse long enough for his men to escape. That stubborn loyalty is what nearly killed him. June 12, 1944, near St. Lo. The morning mist hung low, so thick it seemed to muffle even the distant artillery. General Reuss stood over a map that no longer reflected the world outside his tent. American armored columns were forcing their way through the hedgerows, those ancient earthen walls that turned every field into a fortress and every road into a graveyard. A young reconnaissance officer sprinted toward him, boots sinking into the wet soil. "Her general, American tanks." Less than 20 minutes. Reuss didn't flinch. He simply nodded and ordered his staff to withdraw to safer ground. But he didn't go with them. Instead, he insisted on checking the forward observation post himself, a choice no one understood. Perhaps he needed clarity. Perhaps he needed silence. Or perhaps, after years of retreating, he was simply tired of walking away. He climbed into a Kübelwagen with 2 aides. The road ahead was a path of ruin: burned tractors, splintered carts, helmets half buried in mud. The air smelled of cordite, wet earth, and something else, something metallic and final. As the vehicle reached a narrow choke point framed by hedgerows older than the villages themselves, the world exploded. A shell slammed into the ground beside them. The blast tore the Kübelwagen sideways. Metal screamed. The road vanished in a storm of dirt and fire. Reuss felt his body lifted, thrown, swallowed by darkness. When he woke, he lay crumpled in a ditch, unable to move his legs. Blood seeped through his tunic in a slow, warm pulse. One aide was dead. The other barely clung to life. Minutes later, an American patrol found them, young men from the 29th Infantry Division, rifles raised, breaths sharp, eyes wide. They had been warned that even wounded German officers could be dangerous. That a hesitation could mean death. That mercy was risky. A sergeant approached cautiously, reading the general's insignia with narrowed eyes. Then he saw the wound, a deep abdominal tear, already soaking the earth. A medic knelt beside Reuss, pressing gauze into the bleeding. "He'll die without surgery," the medic said quietly. The sergeant hesitated. Orders mattered. Momentum mattered. Saving this man might cost them time, and lives. The medic didn't move. He held the sergeant's stare. If he dies while I stand here doing nothing, I won't sleep another night. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant thunder of artillery. Finally, the sergeant nodded. Take him. Reuss drifted in and out of consciousness as American soldiers carried him through the hedgerows, their boots slipping in the mud, their breaths harsh with effort. At the field station, American doctors cut away his uniform, their brows furrowed in focused concentration, not hatred. An exhausted surgeon examined him. Abdominal penetration. He's lucky he's alive. Lucky. The word felt unreal. For more than an hour they worked, removing shrapnel, stitching tissue, stopping the slow internal bleeding. Reuss felt himself pulled back from the darkness by hands he had been taught to call enemies. Why? He whispered. The surgeon didn't look up. Because you're human. That's all that matters. Reuss turned his face away, and for the first time since the war began, tears came. Not from fear. Not from pain. But from the overwhelming, disarming shock of compassion. When Reuss awoke again, the world was quiet. The tent around him buzzed with low murmurs, the clatter of instruments, the steady rhythm of boots moving back and forth on wooden planks. Clean bandages wrapped his abdomen. His breathing was shallow, but steady. For the first time in years, he was not giving orders. He was simply alive. Around him, wounded American soldiers groaned in their cots, young boys with shrapnel-laced arms, bandaged heads, trembling hands. Some cried softly for their mothers. Some stared blankly at the tent ceiling, their minds trapped somewhere far from Normandy. They were all too young. All of them, German, American, British, Canadian. Children in uniforms. When a nurse approached him with a cup of water, she spoke softly, almost gently. You're stable now. The surgeon says you were lucky. Reuss swallowed with difficulty. Why treat me? His voice was thin, barely more than a rasp. The nurse paused, studying him for a moment, perhaps expecting hostility or pride. She found neither. Because people who are hurt, deserve help, she said. Then she added more quietly, war doesn't change that. For days, he lay in that tent, caught between lives, the one he had led and the one that was ending. American soldiers walked past him with only brief glances, some curious, others indifferent. None hateful. The sergeant who had allowed his evacuation visited once. He stood rigidly at the bedside but his voice was calm. You gave your men a chance to get out, he said. My guys saw that. It surprised Reuss. Respect, from an enemy. He bowed his head, not out of pride, but gratitude. By late June, once his wounds closed enough to travel, Reuss was loaded onto a truck with other German prisoners. Some were bandaged, others silent with shock, their eyes shadowed by what they had seen. They were driven toward a rear camp where American guards stood watch but treated them with a strange, unexpected neutrality. Reuss had braced himself for humiliation. It never came. Instead, he found a routine, meals at regular hours, medical checks, occasional questions from intelligence officers. No cruelty. No beatings. Just a strange, disorienting sense of being tolerated. In captivity, he had time, too much time, to think. He thought about the medic. About the surgeon. About the sergeant who chose humanity over efficiency. He thought about the dozens of moments throughout the war where he had seen mercy buried, ignored, or twisted. And he wondered how different everything might have been if more men had made the choice that young American medic made that morning. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the camp grew quiet. Some prisoners cheered. Some wept. Most simply stared at nothing. Reuss felt only a dull ache. For the lost. For the ruined. For the generations who would carry scars they never asked for. He was eventually released and allowed to return to a Germany that barely resembled the one he had left. Rubble-strewn streets. Stores with no windows. Cities hollowed out like skulls. He returned to Stuttgart and took a simple civilian job. He avoided politics. Avoided conversation about the war. Avoided uniforms, speeches, parades. But he remembered every detail of the moment he lived because of American hands. He remembered the medic's face, young, determined, trembling but resolute. He remembered thinking he would never know the man's name. And for 34 years, he never did. It was a gray afternoon in Stuttgart, the kind that carried a soft drizzle and the smell of wet pavement. General Heinrich Reuss, now simply Mr. Reuss, a retired clerk in his late 60s, returned home carrying a small bag of groceries. Bills. Advertisements. A postcard from a nephew in Munich. And then he saw it. A thin white envelope, slightly yellowed around the edges. Postmarked, Maryland, USA. He froze. For a long moment, he didn't move. The sound of rain tapping against the window filled the silence. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a short, careful message written in an unsteady hand. In June 1944, near St. Lo, I treated a wounded German general. I have always wondered if he survived. If you are that man, I would like to know your name. Thomas Miller, former U.S. Army medic. Reuss lowered the letter into his lap. His breath left him in a slow, uneven exhale. For 34 years, he had carried the memory of the young American whose hands pressed life back into his failing body. A face he saw every night before sleep. A voice that whispered through the darkest moments of his recovery. Now that man was reaching across an ocean, searching for him. Reuss wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Then he sat at his small wooden desk, took out a sheet of paper, and wrote back in handwriting that shook with emotion. A year later, after exchanged letters and arrangements made by veterans groups, Reuss found himself on an airplane for the first time. The engines hummed beneath him as he crossed the Atlantic, an ocean he once believed he would never see again. In Baltimore, he stepped into a warm, humid afternoon. His heart pounded with every passing minute. A volunteer drove him to a modest white house on a quiet suburban street. Children played nearby, bicycles lay on lawns, birds sang in the trees overhead. It was a peaceful world, untouched by the ghosts that followed him. The driver stopped. "This is the address," he said gently. Reuss stared at the front door. He had faced artillery barrages, air raids, the collapse of entire armies. But nothing felt as terrifying as this moment. He approached slowly and knocked. The door opened. An elderly man, thin and pale, leaned slightly on a cane. His hair was silver. His eyes carried decades of memory. Reuss recognized him instantly. Thomas Miller, older, frilier, but unmistakably the young medic who had refused to let him die. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Miller whispered. "General Reuss?" Reuss nodded. Emotion surged across the medic's face, relief, disbelief, gratitude, something like closure. Reuss stepped forward and embraced the man who had saved him. His voice broke. "I lived because of you. I lived long enough to see my children grow, to hold my grandchildren. You gave me years I should never have had." Miller's eyes glistened with tears. "I only did what I hoped someone would have done for me." They sat together for hours, two old men sharing a story born from war but ending in peace. The world outside moved on without them, but in that small living room, time folded in on itself. The past and present touched hands. Enemies became companions. And a wound from 1944 finally, quietly, closed. The story of General Reuss and Thomas Miller is more than a tale of survival. It is a reminder that even amidst the blood, smoke, and destruction of war, humanity can shine. That compassion can cross battle lines. That a single choice, a single act of courage and mercy, can echo across decades, shaping lives in ways we cannot measure. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in the darkest hours, people are capable of extraordinary kindness, then don't let it fade. Share it. Talk about it. Remember it. And for more forgotten stories from history's shadows, tales of courage, mercy, and the unexpected triumphs of humanity, subscribe, and step into the past with us. Because history is not just about battles and leaders, it's about people. And people like this deserve to be remembered.